Well, hello everyone again. Again, my name is Annie Graziani. I'm Senior Marketing Director at Sunrise Technologies. And quickly, if you had missed the last session, I spent almost 16 years working in the fashion industry, eventually serving in the C-suite where I oversaw all of the operational and technology strategies for the organization before fully shifting gears from the fashion industry to the technology industry. And now I work for, as you see here, the logo at the bottom, a company called Sunrise Technologies. And our primary focus is to empower brands in the apparel, footwear, and home furnishing space by installing the most modern technology solutions developed by Microsoft. And our job is to match the complexity of brands. And we all know that the industry in which we all work is just very, very complex. And we're all very familiar with that, to the most efficient use of Microsoft's business applications. So thanks for joining today. In a very, very short 30 minutes, I'm going to attempt to address the topic of how to leverage technology to build a more resilient supply chain. I did my little intro, so we'll go right on to avoiding excess inventory. So firstly, one of the most common challenges that plagues our industry is the burden of excess inventory. So balancing supply chain or supply and demand sounds like a very simple problem to solve, but actually I think we all probably know that this is very complex. And it's because of planning, and a lot has to do with the fashion calendar and how we're delivering for the customers who are so dependent on brands to deliver on time in a very small window to optimize the full price selling of product, and to avoid as much as possible discounts and eventually selling off price. It involves more accurate data to drive better planning, to avoid the trap of looking into the crystal ball, which I think also our merchandising teams are probably very familiar with. How do we determine where it's worth it to take the risk? How do we determine what our customers are going to buy when our buying cycle is off from the procurement cycle is off from the market week cycle? So we don't know what our customers want necessarily, and we're helping as best we can through our design and through our crystal ball methodology, and oftentimes to determine where to direct buyers to make their commitments on our product. So what this means to business and to the bottom line is tighter measures on overdevelopment of collections many, many months in advance of the season. Something that we talked about on the panel just prior to this call is really how to narrow the playing field just enough that we're not wasting time, effort, money, and just talent on developing excessively a year in advance of when the product is going to be delivered. And this involves your merchandising teams, your designers, and your finance teams, and many, many others who are basically enabling that to happen. And it means, you require a better read on historic sales and better management with your vendors, driving more efficient costs from raw materials all the way through shipping to your distribution centers and beyond. Accurate data, in short, drives efficiencies throughout the organization from upfront planning through allocation. And the aim really is to determine the best possible outcome for your business, balancing historic sales with the future commitments of fabric types, silhouettes, colors, carryovers, so that you can really walk the fine line of inventory, but not so much that you put, possible, sales at risk where you don't have the inventory to capture those sales, or where you are making a decision, too big into inventory where then you may have this excess that you then own, you put all that upstream effort into it, and then ultimately you have to off price for, pennies on the dollar. So the next thing that's important to acknowledge is exception-based reporting. Whereas in the past, and I was very much a user of this type of mindset also for many, many years, I struggled with how do I get to the data that I need? And it was sort of like this journey to go through, okay, let me go into this module and run that report, and that module and that run that report. And I maybe found myself in multiple different modules trying to run various reports to get to an answer. And the truth is that now interacting with modern solutions in a new way has enabled us to surface basically the exceptions, the places in the system that deserve your attention, that need your attention more immediately than just everything. And so rather than reporting to discover, pulling a variety of reports from a variety of different modules, then trying to make the best decision after the data has already likely changed and the story is different, you should expect with any modern platform that you're investing with, that you're interacting with, in a way that the results are surfaced first, that the data then requires, that requires your attention, is what you see immediately. And then from there, you can go explore through the details. You can go back into the weeds as much as possible. But you want to start with understanding where your attention needs to go, and so that you have things like alerts or just sort of exception-based reports, so your attention is going to the places that are most efficient and most useful to your organization. It's really the inverse of the past common behaviors of reporting from the various modules and VLOOKUPs and across various tables and all these different crazy things that we have been very familiar with doing. And lots of brands are still suffering from this, to a place where you have modern, or you're using modern solutions to deliver to you accurate data in near real time, so that you can actually make faster, better decisions. And ultimately, this is really so that you can, in short, make lemonade at every pass. So sometimes we're still going to be reactive in how we're behaving in our industry. That's just sort of the nature of it. But as much as we can, we want to proactively make decisions that start to mitigate as much as possible those riskier reactive decisions. So next is really prioritizing your sales opportunities. And so really, what are the rules of engagement? How do you balance relationships with, maybe some of the majors who are responsible for making you the brand that you are, or your customers who are responsible for making you the household name that you are? And really making sure that you also are sustaining and not just delivering to those majors or to those customers, but that you're able to sustain yourself, because without you being in existence, you can't service those customers that depend on you. So it's important to determine where to focus your energy, and satisfying certain high priority customers. Is that what's most important for your brand? Or is it more critical that the inventory is available to the highest profit channel? So maybe now, especially in a post-COVID world, or actually through COVID, direct to consumer is critical, and we needed to be able to quickly pivot to that D2C world. Our e-com, dramatically increased, and being able to shift that inventory over or make it available to your e-com channels has been more critical for survival more than anything else. That's not likely to go anywhere. And also, it's probably one of your highest profit margin channels. But you can't forego the brands, the customers who have helped you sustain and have helped you to become who you are. So how do you balance all of that? Which channel wins when there's a constrained supply? And that has obviously been a huge reality for us all to face in the past year. So how do you determine that? Or is fulfilling maybe, let's say, 90% of a major retailer's purchase order more important or more critical to your business than, maybe seeing the higher profit margin on the direct-to-consumer channel, as an example? It really is a balance between relationship management and profitability. You need the data to know when to make the right decision with the least amount of risk and the most benefit to what matters to you and to your brand. Creating those rules of engagement so that the system can automatically kind of help you facilitate through that, giving you the final say, of course, is really important. Next is enhancing vendor relationships. This is something that's very important to me. I sort of grew up in the industry working with vendors globally, all over the place, and to various levels of commitment, and watching which parts of our world are specifically talented in silk versus wool versus leather, and how to make those commitments happen, and how to efficiently manage, where the product is going around the world. Are we purchasing leather in this country and shipping it to that country for manufacture and to the finished good? And really knowing what those commitments look like, but also struggling at the same time from a relationship standpoint, making sure that your vendors know how much you care about them, and so that they know they don't have to go seek other business elsewhere, because they know that you're committed to them in a way that they can depend upon. So it's important to determine your smartest possible allocation of product to your vendors based on historic reliability of the vendors for quality, timeliness, and cost. Basically, how well they deliver to you, how honest they are, how much they are, related to you for the common good of what you're all kind of working toward. And make commitment-based agreements such that your vendors no longer have to seek business elsewhere because they know that you're good for it. You will honor your word and relax their concerns around having to find more business because you've fallen short on your commitments to them. This is very much about seeking out the vendors who deliver best for you for whatever your business is, and then just kind of doubling down on those relationships, giving them that commitment so that you can together make better decisions on raw materials and the costs that are coming into that vendor rather than shipping the same raw material across different regions or across different factories, or negotiating on larger bulk purchases rather than little bits all over the place. So allow them to do what they do best, which is to provide quality product to you on time and at a fair price. And you eliminate the noise that vendors, so that vendors can actually just do their job. Well, they've helped you secure their comfort to do so. So while you're making that relationship, they know that you're good for it. You know that you can rely on them, and you know that you can depend on their delivery schedule so that, downstream, you're not rushing to ship product by air instead of by vessel, for example. And you know that your customers can depend on the delivery dates that you've promised. So, based on a total cost from door to door and all the upstream activity that's gone on, you can actually have a better handle on what it is that you do very well and who you depend on to get that work done. You've turned on things like vendor portals so that your vendors are living in the same environment, in the same exact system as you, rather than relying on, emails or, dare I say, fax, which I remember doing that many, many years ago. And I think lastly, we all know that the fashion calendar, for those brands who actually are following it or have followed it behaviorally, it's unrealistic and it's completely inefficient. It's very, very risky. And especially when matched to the inefficiency of the buying cycle. So when you have to purchase things like raw materials or your finished goods in advance of when even what your demand is going to look like, that's a very risky endeavor. And you're also, by the way, typically rushing at the last minute to ship product by air, which just by nature of rushing product, you're likely to have more risk of compromised product, compromised to the quality, to the delivery, maybe shortages, less likely overages. And you've paid a whole lot more for that risk too, to get it to the door, to get it to full price for the most optimal amount of the window. And maybe COVID will continue to draw attention to what the calendar means to supply chains, to the inefficiency of it, and to the waste of it, because oftentimes we then overpurchase to overcompensate for the risk of not having that product available for sale. We know that raw material and finished good commitments are largely due, particularly for the biggest delivery, which is usually your first big chunky delivery at the start of each season prior to the actual commitments from the buyers. So you can imagine, and I'm sure you've all experienced, the risk that comes along with that. So to mitigate the crystal ball approach as much as possible, collect all the efficiencies that you can, wherever you can, by way of using historic data, deepening your vendor commitments instead of going wide to enable more effective communications and negotiations with your vendors, and to encourage sales to sell the product that you've committed to, even if it is prior to market. The best effort you can make by relying on data to help make good decisions to drive your profitability and protect your bottom line is critical. It's not going to be perfect, but at least if you can, sort of mitigate those risky purchase moments without having anything to sort of support that, is better for everyone. Actually, there will always be risk, of course, but this is really about reducing the risk as much as possible while maintaining the relationships with your vendors and your customers and considering their well-being too. And so really in closing, this year is an opportunity for all brands to reevaluate their operations, the technology that is sustaining their operations, what that digital spine really looks like, and what can be done better by way of technology, business processes, and also relationships. So now we all know how real the challenges are of sort of, these acts of gods or these global pandemics or anything like this that ever comes our way again. And I think we all can acknowledge that we don't ever want to get close to this amount of risk again. So if we can really have the data available to us and have the technology in place that enables that, then we can all really focus on what's best for our vision, for our brands, for the future of where we're going, not so much just kind of, putting out fires in the immediate future. And there is no unringing of the bell. COVID happened. We all know what happened. We all never want to experience that level of risk again in a variety of different ways, to whatever that means to you. And there's really just no turning back. So it's up to each of you to make the best decision for your brand situation right now in the immediate, but also for where you're going for the future. So that's what I wanted to share today. I want to thank you all. I look forward to building relationships with all of you. And if you'd like to reach out and get in touch and talk more, this was a very short opportunity to talk about a wide, subject matter. Please feel free to reach out to me. Here's a quick slide just sharing my contact information and also several of the recognizable brands that we've worked with. So, David?
Great job, Annie. That was a whirlwind of information. So fantastic work. And I'm sorry to only give you such a short time, but I think there's a few questions coming in, and I think we can get into the nuance of it a little bit more over the next 10 minutes. The first question is, how does this handle on-demand manufacturing? And I think it's a really, really good one.
Yeah, I mean, on-demand manufacturing, if I was back in my role in planning and working inside of the industry, I think on-demand manufacturing is a beautiful thing. It depends on the business model. And if that is the business model, then, technology services that very well too. If you own your manufacturing operations, the systems that we deploy and really many systems out there can adhere to that too. So it just facilitates the process and maybe the efficiency of it. You still are going to have some challenges in the how to make sure that you're purchasing your raw materials efficiently, and do you keep a small suite of or a small amount of raw materials at the ready so that you can deliver right away on time and very quickly. And that's really up to the brand and what their process is to determine how much risk you're willing to take on to invest in in the raw material side of it. Now, just the manufacturing component of it to quick turnaround product, that's beautiful. That is probably the most efficient way to get product to a customer, but not everyone works like that, as we know.
No. But we're seeing more and more demand for on-demand manufacturing, or at least, there's so many more conversations about it. I mean, the software itself would enable that as well. Would be
absolutely
complementary.
Oh, totally,
right?
Absolutely.
What about lean technologies? How have they impacted the need for agile processes?
I mean, I think that it's really important to know exactly what's going on at any moment in the supply chain, any way that you can track the efficiency of what's happening. The systems that we deploy do that. So, and really any system that you're considering investing in needs to be able to do that to some degree. You have to be able to keep things as efficient as possible.
Okay, thank you. So you mentioned the importance of a good vendor relationship as well, which I thought was very, very salient point. But how would you suggest we make our existing network more resilient to future disruption? If you could maybe elaborate on, you touched on it a little bit in the presentation, I believe, but could you elaborate a little bit more on that?
Yeah, I mean, it's a tricky thing. I think that for sure, when you rely on a smaller number of vendors and you're able to commit to them in a way that you help sustain them too, that's probably the best effort. I mean, spreading too thin across different regions, I mean, that's a possibility too, but the pandemic showed that didn't actually matter. So where that might have been something that was important in the past, our supply chain, regardless, let's say you have, the same product being sourced in 2 or 3 different countries, it would have all been disrupted actually as a result of the pandemic. So I think it really is as best you can, and just considering the pandemic, which I think has more meaningfully than almost anything else, at least in my career, disrupted supply chain. I mean, we all know that there are holidays that we have to face, and we can plan for those things. But let's not forget that the pandemic was right on the heels of, the shutdown for Chinese New Year, which majorly, I mean, that's already something that has to be planned for, just like August in Europe has to be planned for. Those things are already things that we all know that we have to sort of plan around and expect. But when you add to that something like a pandemic or any other amount of disruption, an act of God, no one knows when that's going to happen or where that's going to happen. So the very best thing you can do is be committed to your vendors in a way that they also want to reciprocate that. I personally think that means, one of the things that I'd done in the past in a previous role was assessed the number of vendors that we had. And we just had an excessive number of vendors. We had too many with too little commitment. And so your vendors then don't really care about you. You're not really a priority for them. And they might be fine, they might be good, but you're sort of the one, they're not going to put their effort or their focus on you. And to what end does that service you? I mean, maybe a little risk mitigation, but certainly not from a cost standpoint, and certainly not from a relationship standpoint. So, you're better off letting those who are in there in a bigger way have that relationship while you go focus on, the areas of business or the areas of relationships where you can actually be more, lock arms together to and care about each other in a more meaningful way. And with that comes all sorts of efficiencies. I mean, you care more about, should I negotiate on everything, or should I actually just negotiate on the stuff that I really, really need to negotiate on? They have to put food on the table too. So there comes a lot, along with that, a lot of honesty, a lot of humility, a lot of humanness comes along with that too. You care about each other, but then they also then want to deliver for you. So it's definitely, because it's just like a friendship, you don't want to breach that trust that you've built. So if you can do that in a smaller, more committed way, that's my best recommendation to have, mitigated the risk associated with like a pandemic, for example.
Yeah. I love that point about humanness. Do you feel like we're getting better at that recently?
I think some of us are getting better at that. I mean, I think that it's a big missing part of it. I mean, yes, okay, the pandemic, as a greater society, yes, I think we are, I hope, at least I feel in my smaller world around me, yes, I think people have gotten a little kinder, a little bit more considerate, generally speaking. But when it comes to, in business and making those commitments to vendors who have maybe in the past, have been largely abused. I mean, there's been a lot of vendor abuse over the past years, and that's, we're just cost cutting, and it's all about profitability, but it's always at somebody's expense. Something is going to be compromised. Either there's a component of the product that's going to be compromised, swapped out, because the vendor has to survive. They have to survive if you want to depend on them. And by the way, just for their own well-being, they're feeding people too. They've got employees too that they need to be able to sustain, who need to sustain their individual livelihoods too. So I think that, I hope that people have become a little kinder and a little softer and a little bit more considerate of what it means for the greater good of society to be caring about each other, and each other's future. I hope. I mean, it's something that's always been near and dear to my heart. And I've worked with different, people who have different perspectives on that, but it can't always be about the bottom line. And it can be to a degree, as long as you're caring about, it's got to be about the greater good. And there's a smarter way to make better decisions to actually turn on a lot of those, those kindnesses and those efficiencies at the same time.
It's interesting. On an individual level, we all feel like we're getting better at it, but maybe on a corporate level, the proof is not quite in the pudding there. With certainly what we saw at the beginning of the pandemic, a lot of contracts not being fulfilled, things like that. I can't speak to whether that's continued. Maybe you could, but I get the feeling that maybe the big corporations, as you might call them, or the big companies, maybe in some cases don't back up the pacts and the treaties that they sign with action. It certainly feels like that from some of the evidence we've seen.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's all of that. I really think even in larger corporate firms, I mean, I do think that there's a lot of kindness that can happen there too. I don't think it's just because, people are big and scary, or organizations are big and scary, that there's, and that it equals abuse or lack of care for vendors. I think there are kind people inside of those organizations who care about the vendors that they've built relationships with. For some people, these are career-long relationships that are dependent upon in the supply chain. And I think that's not, I wouldn't generalize it, but I do think that bringing more awareness to what commitments mean to everybody, but also, I mean, if the bottom line is the driver alone, then definitely seek out your efficiencies, because I mean, the byproduct, it's okay if the byproduct is a more sustainable supply chain, or a more kind supply chain, or more caring, representatives on behalf of your supply chain. That's okay if that is the byproduct, as long as it is the byproduct and we're not all just operating on greed. I think that there's a lot to be said for all of that. And I think that being mindful of it all, and not just trying to squeeze the cost all the time, to the point where it's unfair. That's where I start to get a little sensitive to the topic.
No, yeah. Fair enough. Annie, we've got like a minute left. I just wondered whether you'd have maybe some closing thoughts. Obviously, you've joined us for the panel discussion and for this session as well, and I know you're going to be on the next panel as well, but maybe just on the two sessions that you've been a part of so far, maybe Sure. Some closing thoughts.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that, I work for a technology company now, and there's a reason that I shifted over to this side of the business. And it is because, there's a very hard, translation that needs to happen between the creative industry in which we all work, right? And the respect for the data and the technology that actually holds it all together. I think that there needs to be a respect across both of those. The creatives should be enabled by the data that powers the direction for the creatives. And and there should be a mutual respect, and the technology should facilitate that. So there needs to be a common understanding for that, this is sort of very much a right brain, left brain harmonizing that has to happen. And when that happens, it really is like magic. I mean, it really does enable everyone to operate at their best possible, in their best possible way. Having an appreciation at very least is critical. And I think that investing in technology, if you haven't done it yet, it's coming your way. It's just like not having a cell phone. There were days when no one had a cell phone. Now we all have a cell phone. Not only do we have cell phones, we don't have flip phones anymore. We have smartphones. So, we're advancing. And whether we like it or not, the world is going in that direction. And that is going to be the competitive advantage for the brands who choose to invest in that way. To what level you invest? Well, there are many, many entry points into technology, into modern technology. I mean, I represent Microsoft Dynamics 365, which is a whole suite of business applications. And to sort of, kind of have a little moment for a plug here, the nicest thing about it is that it is a modern platform, and you do have many entry points into the platform itself, and it's not scary. You can start with something like just the customer engagement part of it, really understanding who your customer is and how to best service them, and really wrapping your arms around that customer and really just trying hard not to let them go, keeping them close to you, retaining them. And you can't really do that unless you understand who they are as a human. Who they are for your company. What is their history with your brand been, and what is their likelihood to be interested, going forward? Just as an example, I mean, that's just, you should be able to find an entry point in maybe a financially digestible way for your organization that turns on some level of efficiency for your business.